Maxim Volkov hunched his shoulders as he walked through Jefferson High's crowded hallway, his oversized hoodie barely concealing his 300-pound frame. At 17, he stood 6 feet tall, but his bulk made him appear shorter and slower than he was. His naturally quiet demeanor made him the perfect target for anyone looking for someone to pick on. 3 weeks into his junior year at this Phoenix school, he had learned to keep his head down and avoid eye contact. Just make it through the day, he told himself, the same mantra he had used at his previous school in Chicago and the one before that in Denver. His father's business required frequent relocations, and Maxim had become an expert at being invisible in new places. But being invisible was impossible when Cody Brennan was around. Cody ruled Jefferson High with casual cruelty. At 18, he stood 6'1" with the lean build of someone who played varsity football and lifeguarded at the country club. His styled blonde hair and designer clothes marked him as wealthy, and his charisma attracted loyal followers who laughed at his jokes, even when those jokes came at someone else's expense. "Holy shit, look at this walking earthquake," Cody announced as Maxim tried to slip past the group gathered near the lockers. "I think the cafeteria's gonna run out of food today, boys." The hallway erupted in laughter, and Maxim felt his cheeks burn with familiar shame. Behind Cody, his 2 closest followers joined in the mockery. Derek Martinez was almost as tall as Cody, but broader, with dark hair and the kind of sneering expression that suggested he enjoyed other people's pain. Tommy Walsh was shorter, but made up for it with a vicious tongue and the kind of cruel intelligence that could find someone's weakness and exploit it mercilessly. "Seriously, dude," Derek chimed in, "how do you even fit through doorways? Do they have to specially reinforce the floors when you walk around?" "But maybe we should start a betting pool," Tommy suggested with fake enthusiasm. "See how many pizzas Tubby here can put away at lunch." Maxim's hands clenched into fists inside his hoodie pockets, but he kept walking. He could feel the stares of dozens of other students, some laughing along with Cody's crew, others looking uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. The teachers were conspicuously absent, as they always seemed to be when real cruelty was taking place. "Don't engage," he reminded himself, hearing his father's voice in his memory. "Violence should always be the last resort. A true warrior knows when not to fight." But his father's lessons had been about honor and discipline, not about enduring daily humiliation from spoiled rich kids who had never faced real adversity. What none of them knew was that Maxim Volkov was one of the most dangerous teenagers in America. His father, Viktor Volkov, operated an underground combat training facility that produced elite fighters for private military contractors and professional MMA. Maxim had trained in multiple fighting disciplines since age 5, and despite his appearance, he could disable grown men with techniques most people had never heard of. The extra weight that made him a target also served as camouflage for impressive muscle mass. Underneath the apparent fat was a physique honed by years of training in boxing, wrestling, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Krav Maga. His father taught him that the best fighters were often the ones nobody suspected. "Keep moving, blubber boy," Cody called after him. "Try not to break any floor tiles on your way to class." Maxim made it to his first period physics class and took his usual seat in the back corner where he could observe without being observed. Mrs. Rodriguez was a decent teacher who seemed genuinely interested in helping her students learn. But like most of the faculty at Jefferson High, she appeared to be willfully blind to the social dynamics that made some students' lives miserable. During lunch, Maxim found his regular spot at an empty table in the cafeteria's far corner. He had learned eating alone was preferable to the humiliation of trying to find someone willing to sit with the fat new kid. He pulled out his phone and pretended to be absorbed in something while he ate the healthy meal his father packed: grilled chicken, vegetables, and brown rice, calculated to maintain strength while reducing his body weight. "Look at that, guys!" Cody's voice carried across the cafeteria from where he held court at the popular table in the center of the room. "Tubby's eating diet food. Think it's working?" The question was followed by exaggerated laughter that drew attention from half the cafeteria. Maxime felt dozens of eyes on him, some amused, others pitying, but all of them seeing exactly what Cody wanted them to see, a pathetic fat kid who was too weak to defend himself. "This is temporary," Maxime told himself. "Dad's assignment here will end eventually and we'll move somewhere else. Just endure it." But enduring was becoming harder each day. The harassment followed a predictable pattern. Between classes, Cody's crew made loud comments about Maxime's weight or appearance. In PE, they accidentally bumped into him during games. In the parking lot, they made sure he heard jokes about how his father's car sagged under his weight. The worst part wasn't the direct attacks. It was watching other students, kids who seemed decent enough when Cody wasn't around, laugh along with the cruelty, or simply pretend they didn't see what was happening. Maxime understood pack mentality from his father's lessons about human psychology, but understanding it didn't make it easier to experience. 2 months into the school year, the harassment reached a new level. Maxime was in the school library during his free period, working on a research paper about combat sports physics, combining his academic work with his real passion. The library was usually quiet, a refuge from the school's social dynamics. But today, his peace was interrupted. Well, look who's hiding in here." Cody's voice cut through the library's quiet atmosphere. "Doing some research on weight loss surgery, Tubby?" Derek and Tommy flanked him, both grinning with anticipation. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, was at the far end of the building helping some freshmen with a computer problem, leaving Maxime essentially alone with his tormentors. "I'm doing homework," Maxime said quietly, not looking up from his laptop screen. "Homework," Tommy repeated mockingly. "What kind of homework does a whale do?" "Studying ocean currents." The joke wasn't even particularly clever, but Derek laughed as if it was the funniest thing he had ever heard. Maxime continued typing, trying to ignore them and hoping they would get bored and move on to easier entertainment. Instead, Cody pulled out a chair and sat down at Maxime's table. "You know what I think, Tubby," Cody said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I think you're bringing down the whole school's reputation. When people from other schools see you waddling around in our colors, they probably think we're all a bunch of losers." Maxime's fingers stilled on the keyboard. Something in Cody's voice was different today, more focused, more genuinely hostile rather than just casually cruel. "Maybe you should transfer to a school for fat kids," Derek suggested. "I hear they make the desks extra wide at those places." "Or, better yet," Tommy added, "maybe you should just drop out entirely. I bet McDonald's is hiring. You could eat all the leftover burgers." Maxime saved his work and started to pack up his laptop. He had learned to recognize when a situation was escalating beyond mere verbal harassment, and his instincts were telling him to remove himself from the library before things got worse. But as he stood up to leave, Cody reached out and grabbed his backpack. "Where are you going, Tubby?" "We were just having a friendly conversation." "Let go of my bag," Maxime said quietly, his voice carrying a note that made Derek and Tommy exchange uncertain glances. "I don't think so," Cody replied, tightening his grip. "I think maybe we should see what kind of snacks you've got hidden in here. Probably enough junk food to feed a small country." Before Maxime could respond, Cody yanked the backpack away and dumped its contents onto the library table. Books, notebooks, pens, and his laptop scattered across the surface and floor. His carefully packed lunch splattered against the carpet, research papers scattered like leaves in the wind. The sound of his laptop hitting the floor was like a gunshot in the quiet library. Maxime stared at his destroyed belongings, feeling something shift inside him. The laptop had been a gift from his father, loaded with training videos and technical manuals for his combat education. His research paper, 2 weeks of work, was now soaked in spilled juice and torn. This is it, he realized. This is where I decide who I really am. For months, he had endured harassment because his father taught him that true strength meant avoiding unnecessary conflicts. But this wasn't about strength anymore. This was about basic human dignity, about the right to exist without being tormented by people who saw kindness as weakness. Cody was laughing at the destruction he had caused, apparently unaware that something fundamental had changed in the young man standing across from him. Derek and Tommy were busy making jokes about the healthy food now scattered on the floor, completely missing the dangerous shift in Maxim's posture and expression. "Oops," Cody said with mock concern. "Looks like Tubby had an accident. Maybe next time you'll think twice about bringing your little computer to school." Maxim knelt down and carefully picked up his laptop, checking for damage. The screen was cracked, but it still powered on. Slowly, methodically, he began gathering his scattered papers and books, his movements calm and controlled. "Look at that," Tommy commented. "He's not even going to do anything about it. Just going to clean up like a good little whale." "Pathetic," Derek added. "No wonder nobody wants to be friends with him." Maxim stood up, his backpack now repacked with his damaged belongings. He looked at each of the 3 bullies in turn, his dark eyes unreadable. "You're going to apologize," he said quietly. The words hung in the air for a moment, so unexpected that none of them seemed to understand what he had said. Then Cody burst out laughing. "I'm going to what?" he gasped between fits of laughter. "Did Tubby just threaten me?" "Oh, shit," Derek said, wiping fake tears from his eyes. "This is too good. The whale thinks he's tough." Tommy pulled out his phone and started recording. "Guys, you gotta see this. Fat boy's having a meltdown." Maxim's expression didn't change. His breathing remained steady, his posture relaxed. But something in his eyes made Mrs. Chen, who had just returned to her desk at the front of the library, look up with sudden concern. "You're going to apologize," Maxim repeated, his voice still quiet but carrying an undertone that made all 3 bullies take an unconscious step backward. "You're going to replace my laptop, and you're never going to bother me again." "Or what?" Cody asked, his laughter dying away as he sensed that something had shifted in the dynamic. Maxim smiled for the first time since arriving at Jefferson High. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Or you'll find out why my father spent so much money on my education." The threat was vague enough to be confusing, but delivered with such quiet confidence that it gave all 3 bullies pause. For a moment they looked uncertain, as if they were seeing Maxim clearly for the first time. Then Cody's ego reasserted itself. "Listen, you fat freak," he snarled, stepping closer and poking Maxim in the chest with his index finger. "I don't know what kind of delusions you're having, but let me make something clear. You're nothing. You're a joke. And if you even think about threatening me again, I'll make sure the rest of your time at this school is so miserable you'll beg your daddy to transfer you somewhere else." The finger jabbing into his chest was the final straw. Maxim's hand moved faster than any of them could follow, catching Cody's wrist in a grip that immediately cut off circulation to his fingers. Cody's eyes widened in shock as he realized he couldn't pull his hand free, couldn't move at all without sending shooting pains up his arm. "Mrs. Chen," Maxim called out politely, never taking his eyes off Cody's face, "could you please call the principal? These students just vandalized my personal property and are now threatening me with further harassment." Mrs. Chen, who had witnessed the entire confrontation from her desk, was already reaching for her phone. Derek and Tommy looked back and forth between their immobilized leader and the fat kid, who had somehow transformed into something genuinely threatening. Tommy was still recording, but his phone was shaking in his hands. Let go of me!" Cody gasped, his voice strained with pain. "Of course," Maxim said pleasantly. He released Cody's wrist so suddenly that the other boy stumbled backward and nearly fell. "I wouldn't want anyone to think I was the aggressor here." Principal Martinez arrived 5 minutes later, followed by security and 2 teachers. Word of the confrontation had spread through social media, and a crowd of students gathered outside the library. The investigation was swift. Mrs. Chen had witnessed everything and testified that Cody initiated the confrontation by destroying Maxim's property. Several other students provided confirming statements. Tommy's phone recording, which he'd forgotten he was making, provided clear evidence of harassment and threats. Principal Martinez was a fair man who had been dealing with Cody's behavior problems for years. He listened to all sides of the story, reviewed the evidence, and made his decision quickly. "Mr. Brennan, Mr. Martinez, Mr. Walsh," he announced in front of the gathered crowd, "you are suspended for the remainder of the week for destruction of another student's property and harassment. Mr. Brennan, as the apparent leader of this incident, you are also banned from all school social events for the rest of the semester." "That's not fair," Cody protested. "He threatened us." "Did you see how he grabbed my wrist? That's assault." "What I saw," Principal Martinez replied calmly, "was a student defending himself after you destroyed his property and physically threatened him. If you'd like to press charges for assault, I'm sure Mr. Volkov would be happy to countersue for vandalism, harassment, and creating a hostile educational environment." Cody's face flushed red with humiliation and rage. He looked around at the crowd of students, many of whom were recording the confrontation with their phones, and realized that his carefully cultivated reputation as the school's alpha was crumbling in real time. "This isn't over," he muttered to Maxim as Principal Martinez escorted him toward the office. "Yes, it is," Maxim replied quietly. "It's been over since the moment you decided to mess with the wrong person." The change in Jefferson High's social dynamics was immediate and dramatic. By the end of the day, video of the library confrontation had been shared hundreds of times across various social media platforms. Students who had never spoken to Maxim before were approaching him in the hallways, some to offer support, others simply curious about the quiet fat kid who had somehow brought down Cody Brennan without throwing a single punch. But the real change came 3 days later, when Cody returned from his suspension. Maxim was eating lunch at his usual table when he noticed a commotion near the cafeteria entrance. Cody had arrived with Derek and Tommy, and they were clearly looking for him. The entire cafeteria fell silent as the 3 bullies crossed the room, their intentions obvious to everyone present. "We need to talk," Cody announced loudly enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "Outside, right now." Maxim looked up from his healthy lunch and smiled the same unpleasant smile he had used in the library. "I don't think so," he said calmly. "I'm eating." "I wasn't asking," Cody snarled. "I was telling. You embarrassed me in front of the whole school, and now you're going to pay for it." The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. Even the lunch staff had stopped working to watch the confrontation. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The inevitable collision between Cody's wounded pride and Maxim's newfound confidence. Maxim finished chewing his bite of grilled chicken, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and stood up. At his full height, he was actually slightly taller than Cody, though his bulk made the difference less obvious. "Okay," he said simply, "let's go outside." The entire cafeteria erupted as students rushed to follow them to the parking lot. Someone started live streaming on Instagram, dozens of phones recording as the groups faced off between the gym and main building. Cody had clearly been planning this confrontation. He had changed out of his usual designer clothes into gym gear that would allow him to move freely, and Derek and Tommy flanked him in a formation that suggested they had rehearsed this moment. "Here's how this is going to work, Tubby," Cody announced for the benefit of the recording phones. "You're going to get down on your knees and apologize for embarrassing me." Then you're going to transfer to another school because there's no room at Jefferson High for freaks like you." Maxime stood alone, facing the three of them with his hands relaxed at his sides. The crowd of students formed a loose circle around them, creating an impromptu arena in the parking lot. "And if I refuse?" Maxime asked politely. "Then we're going to beat the shit out of you until you change your mind," Derek said, cracking his knuckles for dramatic effect. 3 on 1, Tommy added with a cruel grin. "Those odds work for us." Maxime nodded thoughtfully, as if he were considering their offer. Then he pulled his hoodie off, revealing his physique for the first time since arriving at Jefferson High. The crowd's reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps rippled through the gathering as students saw what had been hidden beneath oversized clothing. Maxime's torso was massive but not soft bulk. His chest and shoulders were slabs of muscle that would impress professional bodybuilders. His arms, revealed by his tank top, were thick with functional strength from years of training. "Holy shit," someone whispered. "He's fucking jacked," another voice said. Cody's confident expression faltered as he realized he had been completely wrong about his opponent. This wasn't a soft, weak, fat kid. This was someone who had been disguising a warrior's physique beneath carefully chosen clothes. But Cody's pride wouldn't let him back down now, not in front of half the school. "Doesn't matter how big you are," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "You're still just one guy." "True," Maxim agreed. He settled into a fighting stance that immediately marked him as someone with serious training. His weight was perfectly distributed, his guard up but not rigid, his movement fluid and controlled. But you're not fighting one guy. You're fighting years of training in multiple disciplines. You're fighting someone who was taught by professionals how to disable multiple opponents quickly and efficiently. He paused, his dark eyes moving from Cody to Derek to Tommy. "And most importantly, you're fighting someone who's tired of being your victim." Cody threw the first punch, a wild haymaker aimed at Maxim's head. Against someone with Maxim's background, it was suicide. Maxim slipped the punch with minimal movement, letting Cody's fist pass over his shoulder while driving his own fist into Cody's solar plexus. The punch landed with a sound like a baseball bat hitting beef, and Cody doubled over, gasping. Before Derek or Tommy could react, Maxim pivoted and caught Derek with a perfectly executed uppercut that lifted him off his feet and sent him crashing into a parked car. The impact set off the alarm, adding surreal soundtrack to the violence. Tommy hesitated, realizing his friends were neutralized and he faced a dangerous opponent alone. But retreat wasn't an option, with dozens of phones recording. He rushed at Maxim with a football tackle, hoping to use wrestling experience to bring the bigger boy down. It was reasonable strategy against most opponents, but Maxim had trained in grappling arts since childhood. As Tommy drove forward, Maxim sprawled backward, using Tommy's momentum against him while wrapping his arms around the smaller boy's torso. In one smooth motion, he lifted Tommy and slammed him onto the asphalt with a wrestling move that would impress professional MMA fighters. Tommy hit the ground hard and stayed there, stunned and struggling to breathe. The entire fight had lasted less than 15 seconds. Maxime straightened his tank top and looked around at the crowd of stunned students. Some were still recording, others were helping Derek and Tommy to their feet, but most were just staring at him in shock and awe. Cody was still on his knees, clutching his stomach and trying to force air back into his lungs. When he finally managed to look up at Maxim, his eyes were wide with fear and humiliation. "My father," Maxim said, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear, "runs a combat training facility. I've been learning how to fight since I was 5 years old. I've trained with professional fighters, military contractors, and mixed martial arts champions." He knelt down next to Cody, bringing his face close to the fallen bully's ear. "I didn't fight back for months because I was taught that violence should be a last resort. I was trying to be better than you, but you mistook mercy for weakness, and now you know the difference. He stood back up and addressed the entire crowd. Anyone else who wants to test themselves against me is welcome to try, but understand that this, he gestured to the three groaning figures on the ground, is what happens when you pick on someone who's been holding back. The crowd began to disperse as teachers and security guards arrived to restore order. Principal Martinez took statements from multiple witnesses, reviewed the phone recordings that had captured everything, and once again found himself dealing with the aftermath of Cody's poor decisions. This time, the consequences were more severe. Cody was suspended for 2 weeks and banned from all athletic teams for the remainder of the school year. Derek and Tommy received similar punishments. Maxime, who had clearly been defending himself against 3 attackers, faced no disciplinary action whatsoever. More importantly, the social dynamics at Jefferson High had shifted permanently. Over the following weeks, Maxime found himself approached by students who had previously ignored him or laughed along with his tormentors. Some wanted to apologize for their complicity. Others were curious about his background and training. A few asked if he could teach them self-defense techniques. The transformation wasn't just in how others saw him, but in how he saw himself. For months, he had hidden who he really was, ashamed of his appearance and afraid of revealing his capabilities. But the confrontation taught him there was a difference between avoiding conflict and accepting abuse. 3 weeks after the parking lot fight, Maxime was approached by an unexpected visitor during lunch. Cody Brennan stood nervously by his table, clearly struggling with what he wanted to say. "Can I sit down?" Cody asked quietly. Maxime gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sure." Cody sat down and looked around the cafeteria nervously. His former friends had abandoned him after the humiliating defeat, and his status as the school's alpha had been completely destroyed. Students who had once competed for his attention now ignored him entirely. "I wanted to apologize," Cody said finally, "for everything. The harassment, the name-calling, destroying your stuff, all of it." Maxime studied his former tormentor's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. He found none, just a young man who had learned a hard lesson about the consequences of cruelty. "Why?" Maxime asked. "What changed?" Cody was quiet for a long moment, apparently searching for the right words. "I spent my whole life thinking that being strong meant making other people feel weak," he said finally. "But you showed me what real strength looks like. You could have seriously hurt all 3 of us that day. Hell, you probably could have put us in the hospital if you wanted to, but you didn't. You used exactly as much force as necessary to stop us, nothing more." He paused, his voice becoming even quieter. "That's not something a weak person does. That's something a strong person does. And I realized that everything I thought I knew about strength was wrong." Maxime nodded slowly. It was the kind of insight his father had tried to teach him for years. The difference between power and strength, between dominance and leadership. "Apology accepted," Maxime said. "But you need to understand something. I'm not going to forget what happened, and I'm not going to pretend we're suddenly friends. You made my life hell for months because you thought it was fun." "I know," Cody replied. "I'm not asking for friendship. I'm just asking for a chance to be better than I was." Over the remaining months, that's exactly what happened. Cody never regained his former status, but he began rebuilding his character. He apologized to other students he had bullied, joined the peer counseling program, and gradually earned back respect through actions rather than threats. Derek and Tommy followed different paths. Derek transferred to another school, unable to cope with the humiliation of his defeat. Tommy remained at Jefferson High but kept a low profile, avoiding confrontation and focusing on his academics. As for Maxim, he discovered that revealing his true self had been far more liberating than hiding had ever been. Students approached him for advice about dealing with bullies, for help with fitness training, and sometimes just to hear stories about his unconventional education. Teachers who had previously seen him as just another quiet student began recognizing his intelligence and potential. Most importantly, he learned that strength without compassion was just brutality, while compassion without strength was just weakness. True power came from knowing when to fight and when to show mercy, when to stand up and when to walk away. On his last day at Jefferson High, his father's assignment in Phoenix had ended and they were moving to Seattle. Maxim was approached by a group of younger students who had been inspired by his example to stand up for themselves and others. "We wanted to thank you," said a small freshman girl who had been dealing with harassment from older students, "for showing us that we don't have to accept being treated badly." "You didn't show us anything we didn't already have inside," Maxim replied. "You showed yourselves. I just demonstrated that it was possible." As he walked out of Jefferson High for the final time, Maxim reflected on what he had learned during his time in Phoenix. His father's lessons about combat and discipline had been important, but the real education had come from learning when to use those skills and when to hold them in reserve. The bullies had chosen the wrong person to torment, but in a way, they had also chosen the right person, because instead of simply defeating them, Maxim had shown them, and everyone else who witnessed the confrontation, what real strength looked like. It wasn't about size or aggression or the ability to intimidate others. It was about having the courage to stand up for yourself while maintaining enough compassion to not become what you were fighting against. In the end, everyone learned something valuable. The bullies learned that actions have consequences. The bystanders learned that silence in the face of cruelty makes them complicit. And Maxim learned that hiding who you really are is just another form of surrender. True strength, he realized, wasn't about being the biggest or the toughest or the most feared. It was about being authentic, standing up for what was right, and having the discipline to use your power responsibly. It was about earning respect through your actions rather than demanding it through intimidation. The fat new kid they had mocked and tormented had taught them all a lesson they would never forget. Never judge someone by their appearance, never mistake kindness for weakness, and always remember that the person you're picking on might have depths you never imagined. They had made fun of him for being different. They had targeted him because they thought he was vulnerable. They had pushed and pushed until they finally got the confrontation they thought they wanted. And in the end, they got exactly what they deserved. Not revenge, but justice. Not cruelty, but consequence. Not another bully, but a young man who understood the difference between strength and violence, between standing up for yourself and becoming what you hate. The lesson would stay with them long after Maxim Volkov had moved on to his next school, his next challenge, his next opportunity to choose between hiding who he was and standing up for what was right.